Hello, everybody. And as always, I have one of my favorite people here. The last time we saw her, she was Grammy nominated. But this time, she is Grammy Award-winning classical singer, voice teacher, arts advocate, Miss Karen Slack. Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here again as a Grammy Award winner.
And I'm happy as always to have you here. So, to start off, we're going to talk about she's been called the queen of smooth pop, one of the most influential voices in all of music, Miss Dionne Warwick. Yes. And so, just to get us started, I'm going to actually just start us off with a small clip of her, the earliest clip we've been able to find of her singing. 1 second.
And what did I see? A band of angels, they were coming after me. Two white horses riding side by side. Why don't you
Okay, so she was 21 there. And the first question I have is how long does it take for a voice to get its color?
That's an interesting question because I think you're born with color, right? In a voice, like you have a voice, particularly those who are gifted, right? Who have always had the same voice. Like I've always had the same voice that I had. It is just through training matured. I think that the color of a sound, you're born with that. The quality of the instrument. It is what you do through your training and through the consistency of singing well. I don't know how much training Miss Warwick had throughout her career, like how many voice lessons she took, how many vocal coachings she had, but she sang everything. And I think that also aided in her development as a singer because she sang, I mean, all those popular tunes, soulful tunes. Of course, she started in gospel music. So there's a variety and flexibility in the way she uses her instrument that I think allowed her voice to mature in the manner that it did. And also, as the voice got older, it got smokier, right? Got more sultry, deeper. I didn't even realize I knew the Dionne Warwick of like the 80s, because of my age growing up, I didn't know the Dionne Warwick of like the 50s and 60s until actually fairly recently on social media. And I'm like, oh my God, I mean, I knew about Burt Bacharach, of course, and her legendary, like all the songs that Luther Vandross sang, Miss Warwick, sang the original. So anyway, yes, you're born with a color, and then as you continue to sing and grow and develop, the color matures.
Okay, and so she comes from the a different tradition of gospel music. The kind of gospel that she's saying, I like to liken it a little bit closer to like the kind of music you sing, like not necessarily when you're singing opera, but what is the overlap between the kind of gospel that Miss Warwick grew up singing and I guess what you do or how that can help develop a well-rounded instrument?
Because that kind of gospel singing came out of the time where more mainstream, like bel canto, like technique. At the time, popular music, music theater, gospel music, all of it was sang in a certain manner, a certain style, a certain way of alignment, right? And how they sing like popular music. I don't know. It's difficult for me to say because I don't want to say technique as if all of these singers knew, studied with people who knew bel canto technique. But if you're comparing it to today's singing, which is way more out of the box, which is way more at the extremes, it's really really loud, really really high, really really dangerous, and very unhealthy singing. But the singing of the time of 75 years ago, the way Mahalia Jackson sang, the way, Marion Williams sang, the way, Dionne Warwick, and even Sister Houston, like, I think it did come out of the operatic style. This is the operatic training, right? In the manner that you used your voice, you didn't abuse it in that way that we do, not we, they do now. I think I answered that question. Like it's an interesting question to ask, and it's an interesting parallel to make because the way people sang 75 years ago, today they would consider that too conservative, too boring, not with enough emotion and feeling because you're not going to the extremes and pushing your voice to its limits. But back in the day, you could understand what people were saying. You could hear the inflection, you could hear the phrasing, the rhythm, the soulfulness was the thing that led. Now people just scream and yell and think that's impressive. That's why Patti LaBelle, Shaka Khan, Dionne Warwick, all these singers, particularly the Sopranos, the ones who sing high, still can hit those notes today. A lot of the girls will not be able to hit those notes in 30 years. They just won't.
Okay, and the reason, and just talking about to the, so her training is actually, she sang in school, choir in school, and actually she is, I guess you would consider it rare in the realm of music she sings. She actually has a doctorate in music.
A lot of the singers that were trained in the old school ways, their teachers went to music school and they learned how to, they learned how to build technique. They taught them technique, I guess, without them, actually knowing that they were singing technically. You know what I mean? But yes, the people played piano, they sang in the choir. Like, so that makes a lot of that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so I see it here. She has degrees in classical piano from the Hart College of Music.
Mhm.
She was one of the few singers in like that kind of music that could sight read. And that was one of the ways that kicked off her relationship with Burt Bacharach and Hal David. And I actually have an interview with Miss Warwick, which this will be like cut with. But when I asked her about the music, she said every song she sang with them was like a test. And let me see if I have a piece for you that I can share. One second. So this is Anyone Who Had a Heart. Um, which is I think Luther Vandross were covered as well as a few others. But one thing about people is when Luther or even Aretha Franklin, Sybil, who did Walk On By, anytime somebody covers her music, they have to completely change the arrangement. And so when we think about what people consider difficult, as in something that's difficult to sing, people think it needs to have three, 3.5 octaves. You know, that Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey needs to go from the bottom all the way to the top. Um, Bert and Hal never really took Dionne. I would say they kept her like an octave and a half, an octave and a fifth, rarely two whole octaves. So, as someone who sings classical music or music similar, what qualifies as complex music?
What qualifies as complex music? For me, it is when the notes that you sing on the page are completely opposite of the notes that are in the orchestra, where you have no anchor, right? You're basically pulling notes out of the air. That has absolutely nothing to do with the orchestra. That's complex because you. That's why Puccini was the best. Because he supported the singer. He didn't work against the singer. When things are complex, when the rhythms are all over the place, and when it doesn't match the actual words that you're saying, that's what makes it complex. When I look at a piece of music like what you just sent me, it's it is a map to me, and it's simple. And then I can look at it, look at the bones of the piece, and then add what it is I love to do, the expression. If you throw a bunch of spaghetti on a page, you're just like, what is this? It's just a mess. a mess. That is not a mess. That is very clean. It's very clear. You know, the direction of the phrase, you learn what's on the page and then you elevate it for what it means to you. But if it's already mess and all over the place, there's just no way. And that's what makes it complicated.
Because a lot of these, ironically, has to be sung like he's tying them on like I guess it's one breath. Like,
Mhm.
uh so I guess you have to have some skill. I think
You
he's
have
yeah.
to have a sense of phrasing, I think, you know, when it has the 8 meter, like that's really soulful.
Hmm.
12/8, 7/8, you know, it never loses its soulfulness, I think. And I think that when people think about rhythm, I'm glad you even talked about this rhythm. People think you have to count one, two, three. No, it is finding the rhythm, but also feeling the movement, the direction of the phrase in the rhythm makes it a lot easier. So you may not be able to hold a note all the way, you know, but if the intention is to move forward through a phrase, you know, it's how you end the note, right? It could, so also sometimes the ear can think it's you're still doing the thing in the manner that you end the note.
And I guess continuing on in that. So because Burt Bacharach, I believe it's Burt, he actually has a degree in composition. And so he used to work with singers and make the music specifically for their voice. And so like everything they wrote with Dion was specifically tailor made for her voice. And something else I noticed about Bert and how David was that they like to compose a lot of music in minor keys. Now, I've spoken to different singers. A lot of singers said it's actually harder for them to sing in minor keys than in major. And I'm just wondering if you have any idea why that could be.
I think sometimes the ear always lends itself to the brighter, you know, the brighter major chord. And also, you know, Malik, people don't sing text. They don't tell stories. They just sing notes on a page. If I'm telling the story and it's in a minor key and it's a sad story song, it's not going to be difficult. You know, we separate this like skill as if singing is one thing and then telling the story is something else. They are the same thing. I think the minor key can be difficult when you're trying to do certain like tonal inflections because then you have to, and that's why someone like maybe like a Brandy, like we talked about before, people say she's a vocal Bible because her ear is lethal, right? Like you got to have a great ear to be able to like lean itself into and do all of the melismas and all of the runs and all the stuff in various keys. That's why jazz artists are so brilliant, right? It's the ear. So yeah, and but then there's some people who sing sad songs all the time, like Mary. You know, her songs are not in major keys because it's just not it's not what she's singing about. So I would imagine it's difficult, but you have to have a great ear, especially in that style of music.
Okay, so her music is difficult, I guess, as it concerns pop music. I mean, it is that it does come from that generation of because I remember Marilyn Horne once said, "Well, when I was growing up and people sang pop music, you had to actually sing it, you know." And so Dion's work is still of that particular fashion, but I guess it requires a certain level of you have to hear, I guess, like, what am I trying to say? You have to have some kind of music education, for lack of a better word, okay.
Yeah, and also you know you got to have enough voice for the big moments.
Hmm.
That's the thing is that you can't blow it all out. As again, we go back to the storytelling.
Okay.
You know.
So you
Hmm.
would describe her music from this particular period as more storytelling based and because he was also very rigid. Like this music from that period, she doesn't really play around with it. It has to sort of kind of be sung as it's written.
Right, and I wonder much more in the classical. Like you're not going to freestyle Mozart. Like you know what I mean. Like you're going to sing what's on the page, right? And also again, like the popular music of the time. What is this? 1960?
Yeah, this is early 60s.
Yes, this was the popular music of the time. This is what white people were listening to. You know, her audience at the time was very white when she started doing it. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's who her main audience is today. When I see her, it's predominantly people who would attend the opera will attend a Dionne Warwick concert today.
absolutely, absolutely, because of the formality of the music that she was singing at the time, but because she's just a brilliant woman. Again, like I did not really notice Dionne Warwick until people started covering her music in our time period. But I'm the amount of respect that I have for that woman and her career. This woman is like it's beyond icon legend. Like it's you can't even the superlatives that this woman deserves are akin to how we describe opera singers for for the sheer difficulty and level of things that she was able to accomplish in her career, like crazy.
Okay, so this is I actually want to talk about how she uses her registers because continuing on in that classical vein, which she has a lot of overlap with, something that I think is really interesting, and just in doing my research about the evolution of classical singing technique, if you look at the sheet music, so that G at the bottom, that E F in the middle, and then the B C like around the middle and top of the staff. It doesn't. Each one sounds different. It sounds like three different registers. Um, I just want to know like because I know at one point I know like an Italian style of singing was the register should sound different for some, and then for some styles like I know the German or the French it should all sound like one voice. I just am curious about how the different sounds in the registers happens or how she uses them per se.
Sir, if this was sung by a musical theater singer, it would the difference would be more drastic because she is a soulful, beautiful voiced singer. You don't hear the register drops are not as drastic. It just sounds like she's going lower, and she doesn't take the time to really make the emphasis with the words. But if she was a theater singer, it would be more like resonant and snarly down at the bottom there to make the difference between the question and then the answer, right? So that's interesting. I think that's a good point to make because again, in the theater, it's really about the storytelling, and in this style, it goes very fast. So it's not enough time. I think the theater people would actually slow the tempo down a little bit to emphasize the dramatic part of it. Um, and that's operatic in a way, right? Like you have to take the time to make the expression, to make the sound that you want in those various parts of your voice. But in this, to me, it seems like the rhythm is leading versus the storytelling.
Okay. So like why would the bottom sound different? Or why does it get at the bottom and then as she gets to like that B C?
Because she's in the bottom part of her voice, which is more chesty.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get to the top, it can closer to the head voice, right? It's getting right back, popping back up into a different register of the voice. Those registers are not married together. They are two separate parts of the instrument.
Okay. So like I guess is it like a preference for the singer if they want to make all of that sound like one thing, or is
Mhm.
it okay?
I think so too, but also what is it they're saying? Like, what is it they want to express?
Mm-hmm.
To me, it felt like she was just keeping the tempo moving. Like because again, the rhythm is leading. There's not enough time to say the thing and then the next thing. Like ideally you would do you know the way to San Jose? And then you would make the emphasis to express why you decided to drop an octave. Like why would you do that? And just let and not make it important. That's an important statement, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what this song is about.
Okay. And so after she leaves Bert, she starts singing more soulful music. There's a period of time in like the 70s everybody forgets about. And then, of course, she reemerges in the 80s. And I think this is ironically, this is another period, even though she's very popular, people forget about. But I'm gonna play a quick clip. How do you do that?
What do you mean? How do you do it?
I mean, it's just like, because actually okay, hold up. And she actually doesn't go up in the early one, but it's like there was almost no space for her to take a breath. So, but she holds the phrase,
Hmm?
I don't know for how long, but then she does it again. It's twice. And I'm like, considering, she also smokes, like, how do you,
Well, I'm sure that you haven't seen well, the wear and tear on the instrument is not obvious yet. I
yeah.
don't know, maybe it is, but not yet for my ears. And all of course, it's the years of touring and everything. You have to keep, okay, so how you do these leaps without cracking and doing all weird stuff and is that you keep the bottom of the instrument open, like, right, like the column of sound. So you don't people think, oh, I go for high notes and I reach up, right? And it's not, no, you have to keep, I always think the bottom, when I'm going up the scale, I think low. And when I'm going down the scale, I think high. And so that they match together. So there are no shelves of sound. Like, okay, now I'm singing my high voice or now I'm singing my low voice. Like, no, it is just one column of sound and everything happens in the middle.
Mhm.
Right? Like I think that people think about, step. That's how you can do the leaps. When you think of the top low and the bottom high, it always stays open.
So, but how do you manage the breath in order to, it's in the stone, like just
How do you
that?
manage the breath?
Yeah.
Well, when you go up to the high note, you have to give more support. It's not about you pushing air, right? That's not how you get to the top. You don't hoist air up. You keep it open and you keep your support. Your rib cage is what we need to talk about. You have to keep, it's your body. People think singing happens from here. No, you get to the top by we call it appoggio in Italian, which means to lean into your ribs. It's the same thing. Some people think of it in the front part and the diaphragm, right? People talk about the diaphragm and all those things. Some people like to push in the abdomen area, push in. Some people push out, but you have to make an activity. It doesn't just happen by itself. You have to activate it with your body, not your throat, and stay open.
Like keep the throat open.
Keep the throat open, keep the space. It's the space inside the mouth. Yes. Keeping the little thing that hangs down when you open your mouth, that's called the soft palate. It is attached to the hard palate. You have to keep that space flexible and open. When you go up high, the soft palate does this, people, so that the air can move. If the soft palate is stuck, the air cannot move. So when you go for the high notes, it does that. But it only does that when you have enough breath support and support in your body, right?
Hmm.
Space, space, space. And most people don't even think about that, right? Natural singers don't even think about that kind of stuff. It's until you're trained. Some people just happens naturally for them. They just know how to sing.
Yeah, at her college, actually, I have an interview. And the interview, she used to play for the voice majors. And
Mhm.
so the voice professors knew she could sing, but they said she sings very well, very fine. And so they actually thought that like her getting training would actually do more damage than good.
Because sometimes it can confuse a singer that is more natural. And also, again, technique is for the days when it's not working. Technique is for the days. Yes, you need a certain technique to keep the highest level of the highest quality of your voice, right? To keep your voice healthy. But ideally, technique is really so that you can get through There are off days. So you'll know, so you know technically what you need to do when the voice is not at its optimum best. When you don't know, you just go out there and it's a wing and a prayer. Right. So there is some certain level of skill that you must have and understanding of your own instrument so that it stays healthy. You know how far you can push it, you know how long you can sing. And for that certain lifestyle, the difference between those type of singers and like the elite athletes of classical music is that we cannot sing night after night, day after day, city after city, getting on a flight, getting off and doing a performance, and we don't use microphones. So that's the difference. Like it's just a wear and tear on your instrument. It's like almost that they need to know how to sing just as much as we do because we are singing over 70-piece orchestras in 3,000 seat house with no amplification. We have to know how to sing. But when you are flying all over the world on a dry throat, getting off the plane, you don't know what the situation is, you're not sleeping, you're not eating properly. I don't know how people do it without some sort of formal training.
Okay. And so I have another clip of her at her in her prime. She's 43 here.
So tell me, tell me, tell me now, and I promise you.
I'm gonna ask you a question.
Uh-huh.
What kind of voice type is that? What do you think her voice is?
Um, well, okay, so that actually goes into my next question. So she does not, in her music, she doesn't sing above A or A flat. Her good high note is the E. It's E at the top of the staff. And so my question actually is a it's like an acoustic question. So with her, like when the voice is settled and everything, I hear a voice that is slightly lower than Whitney's, but I
Mhm.
also hear a voice that is capable of greater volume than Whitney, but she cannot sustain the volume or that dramatic type of singing the way Whitney could. And so, what my question is actually, how is it that she can be louder than her, but can't sustain it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, because power is what you build. Sometimes power is what you're born with. Dramatic sopranos are born, they're not made. You know what I mean? So it is just what you're born with. And sometimes you're born with a soft grain voice, a soft grain, more lyrical instrument. It's just what you're born with. Someone like a with like a belter. Name me a belter, Jennifer Hudson,
Mm-hmm.
or or a
Aretha Franklin.
Aretha Franklin, right? Right. Those girls were born with those voices, right? Again, and also they cannot sustain those long lyrical soaring lines in the way that Whitney or
Can.
even Dionne, right? And Dionne's range is ridiculous,
Mm-hmm.
right? So she has the range, but that's the difference between a soprano and a mezzo soprano is if you can sustain the range, right? You can
Mm-hmm.
have the big notes, but you could still be a contralto. But again, Marian Anderson, people didn't know she had all these high notes because she made her mark as a contralto, but she did have high notes and she could sing high. And you should be able to do both. So what's the difference between a mezzo soprano and a contralto versus a soprano? And then you have, choir, first soprano, second soprano. Minnie Riperton would be a first soprano, and maybe Whitney would be second soprano.
Yeah, Sissy had her second and first alto, depending on what the selection was.
And
But
Cece Houston was definitely like a soprano, like a first soprano.
hmm
Angels, and also Aretha Franklin's sister was a Carolyn. She did all of the high. These
yeah.
they just knew how to sing. They came from the sister tradition. They're piano teachers and they're choral teachers. They studied music, and that's what's missing today. If you want to know it, that's what's missing. Nobody studies, and it's not just about taking voice lessons. It's about actually really studying what the black notes mean on the white page.
hmm
That's why there's very few great singers today.
So I guess there's a difference between having a powerful voice and being able to emit power.
Yes.
Okay.
Power comes from strength, right? To being able to emit power means that you can will it to happen. You can make the big notes with the
Mhm.
strength. Being able to open your mouth and just make this big sound is natural. It's a gift. It's God. God gave you a big old honking voice, as they say. Though you know those ladies in the church that you grow up with, and you're like, oh my God, well, she hadn't studied a lick of nothing. It was just they able to make those sounds. Yes, there's a difference between having a big voice naturally and being able to make a big sound.
That makes sense. Okay. So Dion can make a big sound, but she doesn't have a big voice.
Big voice, right?
Okay.
Which also is beautiful for, again, the storytelling because you can have the dynamic ranges that she was able, and that's probably why Burt Bacharach chose her because she had the flexibility.
All right. And so something I think is interesting. So I only have one more thing with her is Dion stays in the original keys of her music until 1992. She is 52 then. So, I mean, by that time, she's, I guess, on the other end of the prime. But what I think is interesting is that, I mean, I guess you wouldn't know because you are the singer, but have you ever listened to somebody and be like, oh, that was like the last year everything was like really, really working for like a certain singer? For Dion, that's like 1987-ish, 88-ish. What is it like, oh, I mean, I guess you wouldn't know because it's just, but I guess like that's just thinking of the life cycle of a voice. What is it like? How would you describe that period where, it's the last of just really your voice can do whatever you want it to do and everything is functioning as it should?
Right. So for women, we have menopause. When you have children, it affects you, all the hormonal things. We get that before the men do. Because our voices also mature faster than men. Our decline starts to happen slightly over 50, and then things go downhill depending on lifestyle. Because there's just no way you're able to sustain that level on these two little pieces of flesh inside your throat. Like there's no way. The voice matures as it ages, it matures. Some people, depending how what you if you've misused it and abused it and not taken care of it and not drank enough water and like not abused alcohol and you steamed and you kept your best optimum vocal health, you can sound flawless as taking age out of it. You can keep your pristine, the how do you say it, the bloom on the flower longer if you keep vocal health forefront. When you don't, the wear and tear is very obvious. And I will say for women, it's definitely when you get into your 50s. It could be sooner than that, depending on how much abuse your instrument has taken. But you start to hear it at 50. You can really start to hear it at like 55, 56, 57.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm going to play a clip of her. She's actually 53 here. One second.
Okay.
In the frame, so I won't pretend that love won't end up going to my head. My body still remembers.
Her bottom voice gets heavier.
Hmm.
Could be from the smoking,
Hmm.
probably from the smoking. You can see how much more weight she has in the bottom of the instrument as opposed to San Jose. The heft and weight in the bottom part of the voice, which means that the top notes have suffered.
Yes. And I mean, and so I think today I've seen her a few times recently in recent years. I think I saw her last year. The keys have, for the most part, been in the same place since 1998-ish. So I think, like, for example, anyone who had a heart is sung a fourth or a fifth lower.
Mhm.
That's low. But I
Mhm.
guess like at a certain point, I guess with women particularly, does it like can the voice just not get any lower than like, you know?
Yeah, it just depends on your because like as you age, some people's voices get higher and other
Mm.
people's voices get lower. I think it really just depends on yeah, it depends on how you treated your voice. That's pretty low. And she kept the keys and just made adjustments in the way she sang, right?
Well, so 87 is so like she still can go for, might throw an EF in here or there. By the time you get to 80, 89-ish, so the keys are the same, but she's doing different things within the keys. And then by 92, 93, the keys are dropping. And by 98, they're basically everything is down. A
Yeah.
third, between a third and a fifth, depending on what the song is.
Right, right,
Um,
right. Because there's just no way she'd be able to do it any other way. So yeah, and also it's an aged voice, right? It's just an age. It's just there's no way you can just sustain that. And
mhm.
also, yeah, I'm glad that I said sustain because now even when you hear her, she can't even really sustain the phrases anymore at this point. Yeah, yeah, like you said, oh, holding the notes and doing all this stuff like so. It is not also the throat, but the body just is not physically as strong as it once was.
Yeah. I guess technically between she got about she started at 22-ish, 22 to 52. She got about 30 years of good singing. That's
Yes, that's tremendous. More than that, if you think pre before when she was singing for free, before she became or studio singing or all of the things that when you're a teen, people discount that those years count too. Those years count. I mean, 30, I think she might have more than that. Malik.
oh, I'm talking about 30 of her doing everything as we know her to do it.
That's yeah, that right. Tremendous.
Because she has kept the original keys and could still do everything for the most part for 30 years. I think that's about the life of an actual career, you
That's a
know.
career if you're lucky.